Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 70 of the Construction Record Podcast. This is Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, and
Warren Frey, Digital Media Editor for the Journal of Commerce.
Yes, folks, those of you that listen to us regularly, Warren and I are in the same province, same time zone, same room. For this one.
It's spooky, man.
It is. It's a lot of brain power in one room, we'd like to think. So,
Definitely like to think.
So we have an interesting podcast we're going to talk about today. But before we dive into it, just wanted to remind everybody that this podcast is supported by Conexpo ConAg. Check out North America's largest construction show, which will hit the stage in Las Vegas on March 10th to the 14th in 2020. There will be over 2,000 exhibitors there with much to see and do during the show. Save 40% on show admission when you register by January 17th. For this show, you've heard us talk about it now in the past episodes. This podcast, the Construction Record Podcast, is going to be a supporting podcast down on the ground in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
It's an honor for us. It's the first time we've been invited to do this. Both Warren and I will be in Vegas for the show.
Yep. It seems like a long way away, but probably isn't really.
No, exactly. And leading up to it, we're going to be having more featured interviews that are specifically Conexpo related and Conexpo exclusive podcasts. So you'll be able to hear those in advance of the show and in advance of the registration deadline, just in case there might be something we talk about that might entice you enough to attend this show. We're excited to be attending because we've never been before.
Nope.
And when
I've been in the building actually for National Association of Broadcasters, and it's huge. Like it goes over 3 different buildings.
Right.
So just imagine heavy equipment in that.
Exactly, and imagine all the construction stories we can collect when we're on the ground there. So I can, not to speak for Warren since he's right here, but I think that's the one thing that excites me anyways.
Yes, there's going to be a ton of stuff to cover there.
Yeah, exactly. And some interesting stakeholders, and as I've said before, I think the stories aren't exclusive to geography. I think some of the stories that we'll uncover and issues we'll cover while we're there in Vegas are ones that are applicable to the Canadian market, to the Mexican construction market, to any market really, because some of it's just about the basics of running your business well and how you can innovate. And in particular, there's one session I want to talk about today, Warren, that we are going to cover when we're on the ground there. It's a session called Gain a Competitive Advantage Through Construction Technology. It'll occur Wednesday, March 11th from 11 to 12:30, and it's an educational session there at Conexpo. And kind of the highlights is that it's like 4 steps before deciding what works best for you, especially when it comes to technology incorporation in your business in the construction area. We've seen this with some other stuff we've been covering. Construction technology is being considered a disruptor, an evolution that you have to accept. Almost to be viable or competitive.
And everybody keeps talking about when they talk about it, they talk about innovation and people. They've kind of got a healthier attitude than some industries did when they adopted technology, which is you don't work around the computers. The computers work for you.
Right, exactly. And when we look at this, like we look at I'll just give you the summary. The 4 themes that this session is going to cover is 1, identify the problem. And the person that's going to be presenting the session, Tauria Ali, my apologies if I've pronounced them miscorrectly. They're a senior manager of construction technology at Milwaukee Tool. They're going to be running the session. And when they talk about identifying the problem is, before you can solve a problem, you need to identify it. Because technology isn't just a one-fit-all solution for every construction firm. Second theme that session is going to cover is investigate. After you've identified your problem, start identifying what technology solutions may work best for you. Third theme in that session is find the opportunity. And the last is prepare to implement, which is probably the biggest step for a lot of construction firms, small to medium size. It's like, well, how do we implement this and not blow up our current process?
That's true. I went to a recent Procore event, and that's exactly what they're talking about how, yes, there's all this technological change. What do we pick? They're kind of overwhelmed, some of the smaller guys. Yeah.
So that's just a teaser for folks that are considering going to Conexpo. It's a session you might be interested in. As we've said before, go to conexpoconag.com for further information on the show, the sessions, and also to register. If you have any questions, feel free to send something to editor at Daily Commercial News or editor at journalofcommerce.com, and we'll help either facilitate the connection or just answer your questions for you. Now, as it comes to this podcast, just recently this team, we were covering another big signature event. Our news team, we were on the ground at the National P3 conference here in Toronto earlier this week. Warren was there with our 2 staff writers, Angela Gismondi and Don Wall, And you guys covered a variety of sessions over the 2 days.
Yeah, a lot of different stuff, and there's a lot to cover.
Exactly, right?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Warren. Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the biggest themes I noticed in that, and I talked to Mark Romoff, and you'll hear this later in the podcast, was that it's been a big shift. I've been to, 2 or 3 of these things at least, and in previous years it's been look at this big project and how amazing it is. I'm exaggerating for effect here, and also a whole lot of technology stuff. And this one was different. It felt more international for one thing. There's always been international representation, but there seemed to be even more, and not just the US, but all over the world. And besides that, they also had a lot of stuff on the social impact of infrastructure in P3s, and it just seemed more, I don't know if kind of considered is the word, but it seemed to be more of how does this affect us, as opposed to how amazing is this thing. So there was a definite shift, and that was intentional. So you'll hear Mark Romoff talk about that, about how there's certain stuff they want to address, and as opposed to just focusing on the methodology itself.
Exactly. And there's been plenty of discussion about the methodology, especially here in the Ontario market of P3s. And it seems that Mark Romoff has mentioned it in our pre-interview preview to the conference, and in subsequent interviews, and also the sessions a few of you covered, the problems with the model that's being faced internationally, not just here in Ontario, is a lot more risk is being allocated to construction firms, and it's turning off some of these construction firms. Whereas with P3s in the past, it was like, okay, we'll use this model to maintain and save money on maintenance and costs. Now, a lot more projects, when they're coming to the fore, are asking for bigger risk allocation and asking of construction firms and companies, let's say, to not just build a hospital, but build and move the utilities that feed into the hospital. And our industry here is starting to kind of step back on that and go, you know what, that's way too much risk for us. That's something that you as a municipality used to deal with. We just dealt about getting the building up out of the ground. So there looks like some reforms and potential reforms were talked about at the conference. Mark has addressed this issue a few different ways and in a few different places, let alone at the conference. So with that, we do have Mark's interview, but also there's another interview that you snagged over there.
Yes, we also talked to Mary Van Buren, president of the CCA, Canadian Construction Association, and we talked about not only P3s, but also National Construction Day, which is on November 26th, which is meant to sort of highlight the industry itself. And it's an industry everybody knows about and you drive by it, but nobody actually kind of really knows about it. And that's what they want to do, is get people to understand how important this industry is, since it is one of the biggest contributors to GDP in this country.
And with that, I guess we'll go to the feature interviews. Thank you, everyone.
Every year, the convention seems to get more international. I might be wrong about this, but it seems it's even more international this year. So maybe you can speak to what the dynamic of that is as well, because it seems this year it's more, hey guys, we're here for you to invest in, rather than bringing experts in. I'm sure that's part of it too. But anyway, I'll let you talk.
You're right, though. We've made a very special effort this year to, in fact, make this conference more and more international, and for a couple of reasons. One, because it's also meant to be a gathering of the leaders from around the world. And we recognize that there are folks outside of Canada, and for that matter outside of North America, who are significant players in the infrastructure and P3 space. And in order to enable a really substantive dialogue to take place, we love having people come from other parts of the world, and we've been very lucky this year. Just in terms of attendance, we have people coming from 30 different countries. That's really, for us, it's a record, and that too reflects, I think, both the relevance of the conference for people, but also recognition that it's a meeting place for people from around the world who really are all being challenged by many of the same issues. And so it's less about how great are P3s and more about how are we addressing the challenges that weren't there maybe a few years ago, but are really impacting the way in which these projects come to market, so that we can learn from each other. And that's really valuable, and we're seeing it play out as well on the podium. So many of the sessions are focused on some of the big issues that the industry is confronting, and government for that matter. So the opportunity to bring an international perspective on all of these issues is really what's been motivating our thinking in order to bring that kind of broader perspective to the agenda.
You've also in previous years had big technology people, and you do have the Hyperloop guy and a few other people this year, but it's more like, what effect is this having socially, like infrastructure, that which you've always covered, but it seems like that's the emphasis has shifted a little more towards that and less towards technology.
Yeah, that's interesting you'd put it that way. I guess one of the clearest recognition of that is the focus we put this year on Indigenous communities and the kinds of issues that they're confronting. First and foremost, they have big infrastructure challenges, a large gap, around $30 to $40 billion. So they need to address that. And the other reality is that more and more major projects in Canada are crossing Indigenous lands. So there's an importance that needs to be attached to understanding how to, in fact, get that dynamic more effective. And so we're trying to have both keynote speakers and panelists who come from Indigenous communities because they bring a unique perspective to the discussion. And again, they're confronted by many of the very same issues. So you would have seen that we had Roberta Jameson participate on the skilled trades shortage panel because it's a big issue for Indigenous communities. Our opening keynote speaker was speaking about the challenges being faced by Inuit people in Canada. And he did an outstanding job. You know, he's sensitive, he's articulate, and he laid out an agenda of challenges that we as a council are very focused on because we're working very closely with a number of Indigenous communities and associations because they're part of the national fabric. And so for us it's important to ensure that their messages get a chance to be presented and that we can work together to make a difference for that community. So that's a little bit of the, I guess, the social side that you were referring to, Warren.
Another thing is there seems to be a little more emphasis on, there was always an emphasis on government because they're a key part of the puzzle,
Right.
but there seems to be even more this year. I'm talking specifically of the agencies from different governments around the
Yeah.
world and having the Premier talk and his
Yeah.
Minister of Infrastructure
Yeah.
today.
Absolutely. And again, because without governments, there's no industry, right? I mean, no projects. And the business community comes here to learn about their very next opportunity. So you're seeing our effort to, in fact, have more and more opportunities to engage with public sector officials, again, both on the podium and through the networking that's taking place. So we started, as I mentioned earlier, with the head of the Inuit community in Canada, the leader of the Inuit community. That's a quasi-government entity. Clearly the Premier of Ontario, because Ontario's got the largest investment in infrastructure in Canada, $144 billion, with a significant focus on urban transit, so really important. And the reality is that there have been changes in governments around the country in Canada over the last year, and so we wanted to give those provinces an opportunity to outline the vision and priorities of these new administrations because it's of real interest to the folks in the audience too, right? So the intent is to both showcase the next generation of infrastructure investment while at the same time giving these very same political leaders an opportunity to hear from their own constituents about ways in which they can make adjustments to their programming that will ensure that the bidding community actually bids these projects, right? So it's got these sort of dual objectives to them, and I think that's really important. And we've been very fortunate in that a number of the government leaders that we went after agreed, in fact, to come and speak. And we have a number of public sector officials on panels as well. There's one taking place right now, which has the city manager for Quebec City on the panel. That's great, right? The opportunity to engage the public sector with the private sectors, because that's so much of the reason for why we do what we do, right? It's meant to be that meeting place for government, the private sector, and Indigenous communities, and I think this year we've been very successful in accomplishing that.
And finally, we're about to go to a keynote about climate change. So, and that's kind of after building it, the biggest challenge infrastructure has. So maybe you could speak to how you guys are approaching that with both this keynote and then other sessions you've had.
Absolutely. Again, the focus of the conference this year has been less around all the great things that P3s have accomplished and more about what are the challenges that that the sector is now confronting. And clearly climate change is one of those. It's real. It's having significant impact on urban centers around the world. Look at the situation in Venice at the moment as an example. So it's critical, and but there's been a lot of talk about it, and what we're trying to do is put the focus on an angle that is really unique and must have attention. And that's the value of today's luncheon keynote. Kathleen Savio, she is Zurich's North American CEO, and she'll be addressing the implications of climate change for future-proofing infrastructure, but through the lens of the insurance industry, which is really important, and they're actively engaged in that space. So that's what makes her particular keynote really attractive from my perspective.
Okay, great. I would speak about how you moderated that panel, and we were talking about the four, we had Canadian, Australian, and the Brit,
Yes.
and all of them were talking about their various similarities and differences, and maybe you could sort of speak to some overarching patterns you saw there, as opposed to as like the different problems they have, and then the problems we all have,
Right.
and not just problems, but advantages too for P3s.
I think what's interesting is what they all have in common is wanting to do what's best for the country and what's best for their citizens, and making that strong link between infrastructure investment and quality of life and quality of communities. And I think sometimes that gets lost when we talk about it big picture, $180 billion coming into Canada, and then moving through the provinces down into the communities. And so I found that very inspiring, that making that real link back to the citizens who benefit from the infrastructure. The challenges were pretty clear, I think, for all of our countries, in that there's a big appetite to build sustainable communities, to storm or weather the storms that are coming up. But how do you go about it in the most effective and efficient way? And no one has, I think, the silver bullet on it yet. The UK's redoing how their approach to P3s. We saw today that many of the Canadian firms did a really good job, and they were being recognized at the P3 America's Awards. So there's lots of best practices that we can all learn from, and keep innovating and keep trying new things. So I think those are some of the things they had in common, and a few differences.
Now you represent quite a few different associations and corporations and organizations across Canada in construction. What's the overall sense with them with P3, or does it depend region by region?
We represent 20,000 member firms across Canada through 63 partner associations, and our members are consistently talking about how risk is being downloaded to them, or too much of the risk is being downloaded to them. And that's true in P3s, but that's true of other contracts as well. And the contractors want to do a great job. They want to do a good job for the owners. They also want to innovate. When it's a low-cost bid situation, it's really hard to do all those things, to do an outstanding job, to do something innovative that could benefit the project for years to come.
Another thing, we just had an election with the same government but in a minority position, and everybody I talked to said, every association in the western provinces, and I'm sure it's the same in the east, said they better actually do something about infrastructure. They made these bold statements, and now they got to follow through. So I kind of want to get the CCA's point of view on that, and how P3 might tie into that.
So investor confidence is a theme that we've been talking about for almost 2 years now, and a great example is the pipeline, where the firm believed it went through all the processes. They did go through all the processes that they were supposed to, and then things changed, and so they were left with a project that really wasn't attractive to them anymore. And of course, the government came in. So we've been advocating very strongly for the pipeline, that the parties come to an agreement and move it forward, because that does restore investor confidence. We have been at a tax disadvantage relative to the U.S., and so the more that Canada is an attractive place to invest, and it's predictable, that's good for investors to come to Canada.
And do you think P3 helps in that predictability, or is it just another model we can use?
P3s are just another model that we can use, yeah.
Okay, National Construction Day. Maybe you can tell me the idea behind that.
Yeah, so the construction industry represents 7% of GDP, 1.5 million workers, and our image is probably not as prominent as we would like. So if you look at the election itself, what people were talking about, healthcare, education, climate, all very important things. Infrastructure was further down the list, and again, maybe because people don't make that link between the hospital that they have and that infrastructure spending. And so that was really important that the industry raise its profile. And National Construction Day is a way that we can do that. So Canadian Construction Association will be producing some videos and celebrating everything that's happened. Many of our partners already have National Construction Days at different times of the year, so we thought this would be a great wrap-up. And looking to next year, we want to combine it with our Hill Day, so when we go to Parliament Hill. Yeah.
That reminds me of during the session, I think Mr. Corey of Infrastructure Ontario said infrastructure wasn't an issue with people. That's because it's sort of baked in. Do you think is that even a problem, or is it just people kind of know but they don't know that this, like you said, you have the National Construction Day because people aren't, like he said, people aren't really aware, but at the same time they just take it as read. This is a thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, and it depends which people you talk to. Certainly the governments all understand that economic benefit of investing in infrastructure and how it's good for Canada. Does the person on the street make that connection? I'm not sure, and that's another initiative we have, is repositioning the image to be an employer of choice. We have a workforce shortage, and we've been working really hard to attract let's call them non-traditional workers, so trying to get more women into the industry, and Mandy spoke about that at her panel as well, Indigenous, youth at risk, and so that's something else we're looking at, is how can we show all the exciting careers that are there, whether it's in the trades, the carpenters, the electricians, but also some of the new work like drone pilots and things that people don't necessarily think about with construction, all the big data that's there and the innovation that's required, R&D. So it's a very diverse and exciting industry, and that construction day will help to profile what a great industry it is.
I went to a technology thing put on by Procore, and this is local to Vancouver mostly, but they were saying it's not, having this much data is actually kind of overwhelming. It's what you do with the data, and whereas before it was all in somebody's head, now
right.
There's just a tumult of it. Is that something that your members have mentioned, that it's kind of technology flipped things on its head and they've got a whole new set of problems to deal with, or is it actually helping them, or both?
It's both. It's like any industry when new technology comes in, it's a choice of what do I invest in, what do I not invest in. Most companies can't afford to be at the bleeding edge where they're adopting it and then something else is coming in and replacing it more quickly. So being smart about those choices. It has tremendous benefits for safety. They can track where their personnel are on site, so they know if anything happens, they can get people safely out. It's great for lowering cost of maintenance because now the machines are saying, it's time to replace a part, so it has huge benefits. If we look at autonomous vehicles, there's some mines now that are only using autonomous vehicles, so people don't have to go below ground. They can operate the machinery from the surface, so there are huge benefits to adopting the technology. One of the programs we have is a mentorship program, where we've asked aspiring entrepreneurs to apply to be mentored with the industry. And we've had 30 applicants, and we're currently mentoring 15. So that's another way to help bring those interesting ideas to our members.
Okay, great.